Welcome to Outside the Music Box. I'm Chloe Prendergast.
And I'm Emma Williams. We're so glad you've joined us today.
We're both violinists based in the Netherlands and have created this podcast in our search to find fun new ways to share and talk about music we love. Each episode, we explore a different piece of music through the eyes of a guest musician. Our goal is that you don't have to be a total music nerd to enjoy this podcast, so we put little explanations of technical terms, some background info, and excerpts of the music we're talking about throughout the episode. If we miss anything, definitely let us know and we'll clarify in future episodes. We've also linked some Spotify playlists in the show notes with all the music we talk about so you can enjoy for your own listening pleasure.
Today's guest is English violist Annette Isserlis, who neither of us have actually met in the flesh yet, but we've heard a lot about her and have lots of mutual friends and colleagues. And many of the people we've interviewed already on this podcast have suggested talking to Nettie, so we're really excited to share our chat with you all today. She brought in a couple of pieces for viol consort by 16th and 17th century English composers Orlando Gibbons and Henry Purcell.
This show is fully listener supported, so please consider donating via our PayPal, which is paypal.me/outsidemusicbox, also linked in the show notes. We really appreciate the support so we can keep the show running and so we can pay our lovely friend Joanna Neuschatz for her help with editing. Thanks for joining us and enjoy this episode with Annette and some 17th century English consort music. Welcome, everyone.
Hello.
Thanks so much for being here.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. I'm terribly honoured and a bit trepidatious, actually.
Oh, the honour is all ours. So on this podcast, we get our guests to introduce themselves. So do you mind introducing yourself for everyone?
Well, okay. My name is Annette Isserlis, and most of my friends call me Nettie. And I sort of seem to have ended up specialising in Baroque viola, or rather sort of historically informed performance on the viola. That's where I'm at nowadays, but I did start off as playing the piano. Actually, that was my main thing until I was 16. But my identity does seem to be on the viola nowadays.
You identify as a violist, yeah.
Yes, yes.
Nice. And yeah, we've had so many people suggest you as a guest, actually. A lot of our past interviews, have suggested talking to you. So it's really exciting to finally get to chat to you. And also, we also have a sort of slight friend, work colleague in common. My dear childhood friend, Kiki Betts-Dean, works with you at OAE. And
Yes.
I think we all just share a lot of love between the three of us. So just thought I'd make that connection as well.
Oh, lovely. Oh, that's really nice. We're just about to start some German conversation classes together.
Oh, cool. As in she teaching you German? Or
Well, actually, no. Our principal oboe from the Orchestra of the Age of Enlightenment is there's three of us. Kiki's colleague Marina, and so Katerina is going to supervise our attempts at German conversation. But anyway,
great. Yes.
That's completely off the point, isn't it? But yes, well, I'm absolutely amazed that people have suggested me, because I have to say I'm more used to interviewing people about themselves than talking about me, really.
Yeah.
And now you get to be on the other side of it.
Yeah.
And today you've brought in a couple of really beautiful 17th century English pieces. Which one do you want to start with? Maybe the Gibbons, since it was written first?
The Gibbons. I mean, what I find amazing about the Gibbons is just that how old it is, really. I mean, we sort of tend to talk about Baroque music and sort of Jacobean music and stuff. And actually, Orlando Gibbons was born in 1583, which is a seriously long time ago. And
a long time ago.
I mean, it really is, isn't it? And And yet the next piece I chose by Purcell was written about 60 years after that, and we still think of Purcell as really, really old. And Purcell, he was born in 1659. Um, and so it's just what I love about this music. Well, I don't know. Do you want me to tell you how I came upon it, or do you want me to talk about the music?
Yeah, maybe start with how you came upon it.
Yes. Okay. So what happened was that okay, it goes back a bit. I sort of took up the piano when I was about 3, and then I went to junior school and had my piano lessons, carried on with my piano lessons. But alongside that, I absolutely adored leaping around and dancing, and became really into ballet, as little girls do. But I was very lucky to be indulged by my grandmother and my parents, and they sort of used to take me. I went to the Marie Rambert Ballet School as a junior, and then I went to the Royal Ballet School as a junior.
Wow.
And I loved it. And then the opportunity came to go to a stage school, and my parents thought, oh, well, she loves ballet and she's a bit thick, so she's not going to be academic, and why doesn't she go to this ballet school? And a very nice, rich uncle paid for me to go to, well, it was actually a stage school. It was the Arts Educational Trust. So when I was 10, I went there, and it was a boarding school.
Wow.
And the academic side of things was really, really bad. But, we did sort of things like dancing and acting and, well, all sorts of other things. But actually, it's terrible. I was so fickle. But, as soon as I got there and discovered all these other wonderful stage-struck females prancing around much better than I did, I got a bit sort of shy. And then I started actually missing my dancing classes to practice the piano, and do other things and do art. And the more dancing classes I missed, the fatter I got. And the fatter I got, the less I wanted to be seen in a leotard, and it was one of those things where people were terribly conscious of how you looked, and I actually had got dumped into dining room, which wasn't much fun.
Oh my God.
So I sort of actually took solace in my music. Anyway, sort of wind forward a few years, and I kept trying to leave the school, and I was expelled actually for trying to sell my school coat to get enough money to run away with.
Oh my
But
God.
actually, in the end,
How old were you?
well, I was old enough to know better. I was about 15, but at the age of 16, my parents had said I could leave when I got 5 O levels. So I did my music O level when I was 14, and then I did another 4 random O levels the next year.
Sorry, I'm American, so I don't know what O levels are. Can you explain those to me?
Oh, I'm so sorry. It's just sort of certificates of educate. It's just educational levels. Sort of to show that you have had a semblance of education, which I hadn't really. But anyway, and then I decided what I really wanted to do was music and art, and I hadn't quite decided. In fact, I think I already had a place in an art college. And then I suddenly thought, just before I actually left school, I thought, actually, I feel more like a musician as an identity than an artist. So I went to do A levels, which is what you do at the age of 17, 18, at something called Chiswick Polytechnic, which was just in West London. And it was just a polytechnic where you could do things like music and art. And when I went there, the first thing that was amazing was that there were men there as well, boys, and having been in this sort of school full of hysterical stage-struck females, I didn't know what had hit me. But the other wonderful thing about working for my music A level there was that there was a very enlightened head of department called Brian Richardson, who happened to adore early music. He played the lute and he was very keen on it. And he'd invested in what we call a chest of viols, which means that he had 6 viols, 2 treble, 2 tenor and 2 bass viols. And he was very keen for people to learn these viols to play consorts.
We've talked about the viol or the viola da gamba a bit in some of our other episodes, but if this is new for you, a viola da gamba is a bowed string instrument that rests between the legs. It literally means viol of the leg. It has either 6 or 7 strings made of gut and comes in many sizes. Unlike the violin and cello, it has frets like a guitar.
All of these sizes of violas da gamba, which people either shorten to viol or gamba, together create a family like the violin, viola and cello. When a group of these different size gambas are played together, it becomes a consort, which is basically a bowed version of a choir. This was a really popular genre in the 16th and 17th centuries. And we do refer to consorts quite a bit in this episode because both the pieces Nettie brought in are for consorts, so this is what we're talking about.
And to this end, he got this wonderful, wonderful eccentric musician called Francis Baines to come in and teach us. And I was really up for this. And in fact, I took up the viola at the same time. I didn't learn the viola in Chiswick Polytechnic, but I learnt the viola with a friend of my brother's cello teacher. So I sort of just started viola from scratch then, only having played the piano. But on the viol, I just loved playing the viol. I didn't sort of play it particularly well. And because it's got 6 strings, it's terribly easy to be bowing one string and fingering another one by mistake and wondering why the pitch didn't change. That happened quite a lot to me. But the wonderful thing about Francis Baines was that he and his wife both played the viol, as well as his wife was a violinist and Francis was a double bass player and a composer. But they used to invite their students into their house to play consort music. Wow. And this was how I came across Gibbons and Purcell and all that. And it was the most wonderful, wonderful introduction to that sort of music. We didn't have music stands. They had a table which was big enough for us to sit round it and have our music lying on the table. So you didn't have a physical barrier between you. It was absolutely fantastic in their front room, in their house, which happened to be not so far from my parents' house. So I was it was just absolutely wonderful to go there and play. And I remember being introduced to this 5-part in nomine by Orlando Gibbons. It's called an in nomine because it's basically a piece of plain chant that became sort of transposed from its original Roman Catholic Mass context. Somehow it became an entity on its own, and composers that weren't even Catholic, they just used it as a basis to weave other parts around it. I'm sure you're going to be able to explain this better than I can. But basically, this 5-part piece, you have a very, very slow plain chant going on in the second treble part, the alto part. And it goes through the whole piece, and it's, each bar is one note of the plain chant. But what Gibbons does so amazingly is to weave all this stuff around it. So it almost gets buried. It's there. You're aware of it being there. And the whole piece starts with this plain chant, in the second part. But almost immediately, this wonderful descending figure starts, and it sort of cascades of them, from every single part, but just syncopated. And the idea, the sort of feeling is you just forget where the beat is somehow. You get completely discombobulated.
So, just to recap, we actually think Nettie did a pretty good job of explaining the structure of this in nomine by Orlando Gibbons. So in this piece, one viol plays a plain chant throughout. So plain chant comes from a kind of chanting that we can see in many religious ceremonies throughout history. Plain chants in particular come from the earlier centuries of the Catholic Mass. You may have heard of Gregorian chant. This is also a version of plain chant. But the plain chant used in nomines in general comes from the Gloria Tibi Trinitas in the Roman Catholic liturgy. Here's the original Gloria Tibi Trinitas plain chant by itself. Gloria Tibi Trinitas equalis una Deitas et
And then, as you just heard Nettie explain, Gibbons took this Gloria Tibi Trinitas plain chant melody and slowed it down a lot, so much so that you can't even hear that that is the melody anymore. The second to the highest part plays this chant the entire time, while the other parts play faster notes around it. Here's how it sounds in the version from Gibbons.
And it's almost as if you're floating. It doesn't feel at all grounded because you don't really know where the beat is. So if you had to write it down from ear, you really would have trouble sort of somehow writing it down. And it's really clever as well. Because there's a lot of imitation. So in canon, which means that you get one part playing something and then another part will come in with the same thing but a little bit later, so it's as if it's following a few steps behind. And then you get some things that are upside down, and and I absolutely adore music that is harmonically very scrunchy and satisfying, but also that's very clever. I just love clever music. I don't like it to be cluttered, too cluttered to follow what's going on. But I just am so amazed, when you think how early this piece was. I suppose he was writing it between 1610 and 1620 or something. I'm not absolutely sure. But it is the most wonderful piece of music. I just absolutely love it. And
Yeah,
and
that's amazing.
it is amazing. And it starts off, really, really slowly. So you get this, and it's got this sort of lovely, almost like bells ringing, these descending scales, and then you get little ripples going up alongside, and it just carries on like that. And then towards the end of the piece, it just carries on, just getting more and more active. And so you started off with your dum 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 dum, and then you get dum 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 dum, and then da 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 da, and by the end it's going dum lum lum lum, and it's really sort of getting like that. And then it sort of somehow gets to the end in such a triumphant way. And although it's a sort of minor piece, it ends with this wonderful major chord, and you just feel so good when you get to the end. It's the most wonderful, wonderful piece, really. That's why I absolutely love it. And I found when I was playing it, I would go into a sort of trance. It's a complete out of body experience playing music like this. So that's why I love it so much.
Yeah. And do you remember when you first were playing it? Do you remember realizing how clever it was logically, or were you just like, I love this? How much of the compositional
cleverness did
Yeah.
you
Well,
understand
the
at that moment?
first time through, I was probably hanging in there for grim death, trying not to get lost, counting like any,
Yes.
Yeah.
not wanting to let myself down, and sort of not wanting to let Francis and his wife June down, and
Yeah.
so I was probably the first up, but I was aware this is really weird. It's all syncopated. I've never played anything like this, as old as this. That does something so modern in a way, and I thought this is absolutely extraordinary. And then we played it through again because I'm sure somebody got lost and it ground to a halt, and we started again. And each time we played it, and we used to play it every week because I used to ask for it because I loved it so much. And each time we played it, I thought I sort of uncovered different layers and just got to love it more and more and more. And I love the harmonic language, and I love the very sort of calm way it sort of starts, and you're aware, whoever was playing the in nomine, it was a bit of a grind for them, and it was just became an exercise in bow control. So we used to take it in turns to play that part, I mean, although the tenor viol was always my favoured one, we used to swap round sometimes, and it was a very good way of having to learn how to transpose and sort of read different clefs and do things like that, and that stood me in good stead later.
Yeah. And I'm sure it also kept you, it helped you understand the piece better, because when you play all of the parts, you understand everything better as well.
It becomes multifaceted, and you almost don't need the score because you know how everything fits together. I mean, in a way, that's another thing. I mean, conductors, they often forget when you're playing for a conductor, they forget they're the only person that's got the full score, and they'll say to someone, listen to the bassoon. And you think, well, if you're over the other side of the orchestra, you don't necessarily know what the bassoon. I mean, in fact, I was lucky because of this training. I have always become quite aware of what other instruments are doing, and also being a viola player, we sit in the middle of the orchestra, so I can usually hear. But it does strike me that conductors often forget that we have our own line, so the rest is detective work and listening.
Yeah. It must have been such a great way to sort of get into this sort of music, especially, I mean, of course you had your piano training, but then as a chamber musician and playing with other people, just playing viol consort music is like the perfect way to learn all of the different ways of having to be flexible and, clever musician, I guess.
Absolutely.
It's amazing that just sort of happened to be how you got into it.
It's absolutely true. I mean, and this was alongside, because although I was at boarding school, when I came back in the holidays, we did have a piano trio because my younger sister Rachel played the violin, and Stephen, who, there was sort of more or less 3 years between us all, and Stephen had taken up the cello. So we used to play piano trios with me on piano quite a lot. So we got used to playing with each other there, and that, we loved doing that, and my sister and I used to play piano duets a lot, and we'd all accompany each other. We all played, well, Stephen actually, he was quite young at that stage, but he was pretty good at the piano as well. So we used to do a lot of that at home, but this was another dimension, playing consorts. But I have to say that I took up the viola at the same time I took up the viol, and so I was at the beginning, for the first year, I found it actually very easy, and probably my viola teacher probably took me a bit too fast. I wasn't practicing very much because I used to get made fun of at home. My little brother used to say, when I started playing the viola, he said, when I played slowly, I sounded like a cow. But when I played fast, I sounded like a hen. And it was so inhibiting that, I used to try and make sure no one could hear me when I was practicing. So I didn't really do enough
That's so sad.
I mean, it was funny, but he didn't realise. But,
but
it was a bit inhibiting because I had so much to catch up on, and he and Rachel were already pretty good, so it was a bit in.
How'd you start the viola? How did that happen? Like, why the viola?
Yes, well, no, I did want to play the viola, but my parents said until I got these O levels, I couldn't take up anything other than the piano because they were worried it would take away from my studies. And this expression, you have to have something to fall back on in case you don't make it as a musician. And this idea that magically having 5 O levels is going to open your, it's absolute rubbish. I didn't use anything I did in my O levels. I think I did religious knowledge, just completely out of completely desultory, because I did English language, English literature, and music and art, and then, oh God, I need another one, and I didn't know what to choose, so sort of that came up, but I didn't know anything about it and forgot about it straight away afterwards. But anyway, when I took up the viola, as it happened, you see, my father played the violin, my mother played the piano, my younger sister Rachel played the violin, Stephen played the cello. So it was obvious if we wanted a piano quintet in the family, we had to have a viola. And I'd never particularly wanted to play the violin anyway, because I found it a bit dog worldish, and I'm more identified with the cello and the viola. And my brother already played the cello. So I went straight on the viola. And the extraordinary thing was that although I did do chamber music and quartets and stuff, and I didn't really have a formal technical training at all, but because of the viol, it turned out that really my acquisition of viola music from the moment I went to the Royal College of Music 2 years after I started, that all my repertoire was chronological, really, on the Baroque viola. It really was chronological, and I felt I'd started from this and went through Purcell and up to Vivaldi and Bach and Handel, and I just was very, very lucky, really. And it was just very lucky that Francis Baines, who taught me the viol, completely coincidentally, he was made head of early music at the Royal College of Music the year I started there. So I was able to carry on. But also, I should say that with my brother's cello teacher, she was amazing, Jane Cowan, and they used to run. It was called the International Cello Centre, and she'd known Casals and. I don't know. She was absolutely amazing, and they used to do these summer courses in Austria, and the first one I went to, when I'd just taken up the viola, completely coincidentally and luckily for me, Catherine McIntosh, Cat McIntosh. I don't know if you've heard of her.
Yeah, I've had a lesson with her.
And she just happened to be there. And we did a suite from the Fairy Queen. And I think, this is what I'm going to do. This is perfect, absolutely me, So I really loved it. I took to it like a duck to water. So I was very happy to have had that introduction as well. So at the Royal College of Music, Francis Baines started an early music little Baroque ensemble, and Alison Berry and I were in that. Alison Berry, who later went on to be one of John Eliot Gardiner's leaders for the English Baroque soloists and one of the leaders for the Orchestra of the Age of Enlightenment. So we first met each other when I think Ali was about 15 and I was 16. So we go back a very long way. Yes.
Oh. Sounds like the golden days of discovering all of this early stuff, and just such an amazing time.
I mean, gosh, for you, I mean, I should think your parents weren't even born when I started doing all this. It was such a long time ago.
I mean, it's interesting because my mother is also a musician, and she did most of her career as a folk singer or songwriter, but she also sort of magically stumbled upon the viola da gamba when she was doing her undergrad at the University of Colorado in Boulder, and just the head of the department happened to have a whole consort of viols and recorders, and was like, you should do this. You already play the violin and piano. You might as well. And so she stumbled into early music in the 70s, because she was just there and like happened to me. It's like sort of similar. And so she also fell in love with this music as well at a young age.
It is wonderful music. It's so sad that it's not better known because at music colleges, if you play the violin or the viola or the cello, that's it. You sort of tend to start with Bach. You wouldn't necessarily, unless you actually elected to study it or play the viol, get to know this amazing, amazing music. And I really would encourage everybody to try and get acquainted with Gibbons and Purcell and
yeah, and we were talking about this because I discovered this music early because of my mother. She'd started an early music ensemble in my like middle school, which is for you guys, it was when I was like 11 or 12. And so she just, for all of the kids in my middle school, we met like before school 2 or 3 times a week, and we would just play. We did it on recorder because we all played recorder.
Yeah.
But we would also, she'd introduce, like she had a couple of viols, and so we'd like learn to play it. And I remember just sitting there at age like 12 and 13 and playing things like this Gibbons and other things and just being like, this is the best ever. I think we sounded terrible, but it didn't matter.
It didn't matter.
It was the best.
Yeah, how brilliant. Oh, that's nice. Oh, I'm glad to know that you love it too, because I think it's fantastic. Really.
Yeah, and it's funny because I also got to know Gibbons sort of early on as well from singing all of his choral stuff, and then sort of doing consort music through the singing, and then trying to do it on violin as well. And it never sounds as good when you just play it on on violin, viola, and cello. But it, the feeling of singing his music and playing it, it's so amazing.
Yeah, I mean the Silver Swan is very well known, one of his madrigals, isn't it? And that's so beautiful, isn't it?
Yeah, it was always a good day when there was Gibbons on the list.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Is there anything else you wanted to say about Gibbons, or should we move on to the Purcell now?
I think I've pretty much covered. It's not that it's if I have very much to say about it, just that I love it. But I just did want to make the point that we think of Purcell as an early composer, but this piece was written 60 years later than the Gibbons. And if you think of a period of 60 years, the difference in styles you get between different composers in 60 years, it's quite extraordinary, isn't it? And sort of Gibbons and Purcell tend to get lumped together. It's true that Purcell was writing this particular fantasia that I wanted to talk about at the end of his short life. Well, I mean, this was written in 1680.
So 15 years before he died, yeah.
That's right. Actually, it's true. He didn't die till 1695, but he still, and he died quite young, didn't he? But I think he would have been about 21 when he wrote this piece. And this piece, it was quite an archaic form.
Yeah, it's actually a really interesting point that Nettie is making about these pieces being written 60 years apart, and the changes that can happen in music in that span of time. If we think about 60 years earlier than right now, that was the beginning of the 1960s, which were the years of the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, the Kinks, and Elvis Presley. And as we all know, music being written today sounds a lot different. For a start, we have autotune.
The other interesting point about this specific piece by Purcell is that he actually wasn't trying to write in the latest fashion, but was sort of doing a throwback to an older style. We were thinking about a comparison that we have today, and it's kind of like doing a cover of an older classic song. For instance, Moon River was written in 1961 and was made popular that year by Audrey Hepburn in Breakfast at Tiffany's. There have been a whole lot of covers of Moon River over the years, but to stick with the 60 years theme, the Grammy Award for Best Cover in 2020 went to famous English jazz whiz kid Jacob Collier for his cover of Moon River. You can clearly hear the original Moon River in there, but like Gibbons and Purcell with their versions of plain chant, he actually uses the same technique by singing lots of fast notes around the main tune in his cover. Here is Audrey Hepburn singing the original Moon River.
And here's Jacob Collier's 2020 cover version.
Moon river, wider than mine, I'm crossing you in style someday.
And now to get you back into the 17th century English sound, here's some of the Purcell we're chatting about with Nettie.
All the English composers, they had this wonderful language which was so touching and so full of if I say false relations, that's something I'm sure you can explain better than I can. But it's when you get this real sort of scrunchy sort of chord, or something that really almost sort of pierces you, and then it resolves again. And I just adore things like that, And this particular piece is full of those. This Fantasia in D minor, which is in 4 parts.
Yeah, so basically false relations are when two notes that kind of shouldn't be together are in fact played either at the same time or very close together, and they make you go, when you hear them. Purcell is particularly known for using lots of false relations, they're also called blue notes, which make his music extra crunchy. Because these notes are so unexpected and the music is so old, it can be difficult sometimes to really be sure if a note is actually just a mistake in the score or if it is in fact a false relation. This is something that often comes up in rehearsals and keeps life interesting.
And again, I learned this with Francis and June, and I just couldn't believe this piece because for me, it was so multi-dimensional. I mean, Purcell, this was sort of, by the time he wrote this, and we think he probably did write it for viols. It's not absolutely sure, but it was already a sort of archaic form. But Purcell so valued the composers that had gone before. He really did sort of he kept doing in nomines, and it's amazing how long the whole in nomine form lasted, because I think that had started in something like with John Tavener in about 1540 or something, and it went on for years and years, because they loved it so much, and it was such a good intellectual exercise as well as just seeing what you can do. And this Fantasia by Purcell, what I love about it is that it's very clever, because it starts off, all the parts come in with a fourth meaning, from da 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 da, 1 2 3 4, it dum dum or dum dum. It has a lot of that, and so you've got mirror images. The way it starts with a descending fourth and the tenor, and almost immediately you get an ascending fourth in the top line, and it's literally mirror image, and it goes sort of in opposite directions, like a reflection looking into a lake or something, and it's absolutely brilliant. And then he brings in canon as well, which means you get the same thing but 2 beats later, or however many beats later. and again, it starts very sort of calmly, and then and practically every bar in one part or another, you've got dum da dum bum, and then eventually it becomes fifths, which is 1 degree, bigger interval, and then it then you get this incredible section, which is sort of call and response. It's a bit like a gospel choir or something, where you get it initiated by the first voice, which goes dum 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 dum, and all the other 3 voices go yeah 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 yeah. Somehow they join in together with the same rhythm, so you get a bit of sort of unison rhythm, simultaneous, which we haven't had at this point, and it always seems to be led by by the top voice, but then you get a canon of everyone going dum bum 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 bum. And I think again, what I love about consort music, it is so conversational and democratic. Everybody gets a chance to be heard, and every part is as important as every other. It's absolutely the opposite of having a tune and accompaniment, and I've never enjoyed that sort of thing nearly as much. And
Yeah.
although I'd sort of wanted to be a dancer, and a lot of dance music is sort of tune and chum 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 chum, that as music on its own doesn't interest me nearly as much as something like this, where everybody is sort of equally valid and has a point of view. So after this call and response, and then there's a bit of contrapuntal stuff where everybody is saying what they have to say, suddenly he goes into something called brisk, which is a completely different mood to everything we've had before. Everything up till then was very, very hypnotic and just sort of gentle. And suddenly you get dum bum 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 bum, coming from the bass actually first, and then it goes bass, and then the tenor, and then the top, and then the alto, and that's much friskier, and it's sort of really again it's just sort of whipping the whole thing up. And then just before the end, but often at the end of these fantasias, Purcell puts what he calls a drag. In fact, it says slow. He wrote slow. But just before that, everything somehow goes into free fall harmonically. It sort of falls into really weird sort of keys. And it's as if you're tumbling through, I don't know, sort of, you're just sort of tumbling down, and you don't really know where you're going to end somehow, and you're turning around, and it goes through all the keys, and then you've got this slow, which is you can really feel that the whole thing is grinding to a halt. I think that's why it's always called a drag. And by the time you end, he ends actually with a cadence in D major. We started in D minor, but it doesn't even feel like the home key. It feels as if you're still up in the air. It's the most weird thing, because you've been so shaken around harmonically. You just became completely discombobulated. And then you end, on in D major, but it almost feels like you're ending in the dominant, because you've become so disorientated. So I hope that's not too technical for you, but I just wanted to sort of try and tell you how it feels.
Yeah, it's sort of weirdly hopeful but also discombobulating at the same time, because you've gone through so many different kind of characters and emotions and sort of tension and release, and things don't seem to get resolved throughout. It sort of just moves on to the next thing, and then it kind of feels like an ending, but you're also sort of like, but wait, what just happened?
It's exactly
Where?
like
What?
that. Exactly.
Yeah.
Whichever part one is playing in any of these consort music pieces, it's always such an interesting part. And I think for me, that relates very much to playing the viola in a string quartet, playing, because again, you can be quite subversive from the middle of the texture. And I absolutely love that. Haydn, Beethoven, Mozart, they all really know how the viola can make its point felt, even if it is sort of buried. I always think of the viola as a sort of Nutella filling of the sandwich, the sandwich filling, you've got your
Nice.
bread violin, bread cello, but you've got the sandwich filling, which is where the harmonic interest lies. And I love doing that.
Power from within.
Yes. But I'm very aware you two are violinists, so I don't mean any disrespect by saying that.
Don't worry.
I think we're both violinists who prefer playing second anyway, so
Oh.
we're always on, we're on your team, because
you're my sort of violinist then.
Yeah.
Because, I've often felt, this is a terrible thing to say, but with viola players, any viola player that actually actively enjoys standing out there in front of an orchestra squawking away up at the top of the A string, I reckon their soul is not a viola player. I think they're a violinist in disguise myself.
Well, we'll take that up with the viola committee of the world.
You
at
do
some
that.
point.
Yeah. What a controversial opinion you just shared. No, it's true. And I play in a string quartet, and we were just having rehearsal yesterday, and we were playing some Beethoven, and I'm most of the time second violin in this quartet. And it's true, there's just so much fun stuff in those middle voices.
Yeah.
That you can,
there really is,
and you decide when to bring that out and when to be like, yeah, this is like the thing you should listen to now, and when to like hang back and just fill in the rest of the texture or whatever. Like, you get so many different roles.
Exactly. And so often the viola and the second violin are in cahoots and having fun together, while the first violin's being frantically concentrated somewhere up at the top there, and the cellist is sort of trying to sort of underpin everything, and we can be having a brilliant time.
Yeah.
It's so, I love playing quartets, actually. I really, really love playing quartets.
Me too. So how does it feel different to play in a quartet versus in a like consort? Because it's both sort of families of instruments, right? Both families of instruments that like their sound blends together in a particular way because it's from the same family, but it is a very different kind of thing. And of course you're playing different music, but yeah, how does that feel different to you?
Well, as you say, we're playing different music, so the writing is different. It's just different. As I said, with a viol consort, there's something about that sort of growly, groany texture. You become embedded in it, and you get into this sort of trance where you lose yourself as an identity. You just become part of this amazing sort of conversational texture. But having said it, how democratic and conversational it is, at the same time, I used to find I completely lost any sense of self. It was all about participating in this. Whereas in quartet, I've always been terribly aware that I'm the viola, and the viola has this to say, and the viola is going with the cello here to make something amazing in the harmony, and the viola's playing these suspensions here,
Yeah, I really like what you said about kind of having the greater whole. I mean, of course, you're always thinking about the greater whole with both of them, but I do think it's much easier to just, sort of lose yourself in the greater whole when you're playing consort music. It feels like you're just part of this moving machine that just organically just kind of goes. Whereas string quartet, you kind of have to have a really strong identity that can then also work with other strong identities, maybe.
Yes, and with string quartets, you're very aware that Mozart and Haydn were writing for themselves and their families and friends to play together. So each part does have its own personality, distinct personality, I think. You're sort of aware that they were writing with people in mind somehow. And Beethoven, actually, most of the really good composers played viola and enjoyed playing the violas. That's another generalization,
Yes,
but there you go.
And so you're also talking about the fact that these two pieces that you brought were about 60 years apart, and then you found another piece that's another 60 years later.
Yes.
Did you want to quickly tell us about that one?
Well, I did, but actually, I in fact, my maths were a little bit suspect. I realised in retrospect, but I love this piece so much that I just want to share it with you and everybody. Because
Great,
I just love
we're ready.
So it's from a Rameau opera called Les Boreades, which he composed in the last year of his life, and he lived a very long time, but it was never performed in his lifetime. Which is really sad. And the first time it was actually staged happened to be by Sir John Eliot Gardiner, except he wasn't Sir in those days, and I played for him. And in 1982, we went to the Aix-en-Provence Festival and did a staging of Les Boreades, which is a most amazing, amazing, amazing opera. The music is fantastic. And they thought that because I don't know, there was something dodgy about the plot. They thought that might have been why it was never performed in his lifetime. It featured an abdication, which they thought was a bit close to the bone at that time. Anyway, but
fair enough.
Okay.
this particular piece occurs at the beginning of Act 4, and it's called Entrée de Polymnie, the entrance of Polymnie. And Polymnie, actually, I think, was Orpheus's mother, and I think she was a daughter of Zeus. But anyway, she's credited with discovering the lyre, whatever. But anyway, this piece of music, I hope you're going to be able to play it when it comes to it, because it's the most beautiful, beautiful piece of music. And it uses, again, what it's got in common with the Gibbons is that it starts off with these wonderful just scales, cascades of downward scales. And it's just wonderful. And you've got a very high bassoon. Well, you've got two bassoons, and the bassoon, there's a particular soulful quality when it's high and it does these scales. And then the use of the flute as well for colour and these wonderful soft strings. I just think it's absolutely fantastic. And doing it with John Eliot was really great because he was so excited by it. And I think we all absolutely adored this piece of music.
Yeah, and so amazing to play it in France, staged, and sort of do it in its home turf. Yeah.
Yes. I don't know. I just think it's absolutely magic. And it always brings back, when I hear that, it brings back the balmy heat of Aix-en-Provence and the colours and everything.
Nice.
It was absolutely great. Yeah, absolutely loved it.
Well, we have one final question that we ask at the end of all of our interviews.
Oh,
So we have to ask you also.
Yes.
Is there a piece from another instrument's repertoire that you're jealous of?
Well, there is actually. And it is. Now, you're going to be really surprised by this, but it's the Rachmaninoff Cello Sonata. And I just adore it, particularly the slow movement. I don't know why all my choice of music tends to be slow at the moment, but there you are. I'm getting older. But I absolutely adore this piece. And if I hadn't taken up the viola, I would have wanted to be a cellist, but my brother got there first. But I just think it is the most wonderful, wonderful piece of music. I just love it. And I am jealous. And actually, there is a version for viola, but it just doesn't cut it in the same way.
It's not the same thing.
Yeah, it's hard, isn't it?
Yeah. And I love that piece.
Great.
Yes.
Oh, great
Yeah,
choice.
nice.
Yeah.
Yes.
Would you recommend that we play? Has Stephen done a recording of it?
Stephen's done a very
sure
good
he has.
recording of it. Yes.
Okay.
Should we put that as the
Yes,
example,
you can.
or would you? Yeah. Okay. Great. Cool. So, is there a way that people can kind of support you, get to know what you're doing, get in touch with you if you like? Basically, plug yourself for a minute, even though that's a bit hard.
Yeah. Well, actually, really, nowadays, the main point of contact is Orchestra of the Age of Enlightenment. There's my podcast, Tea with Nettie, which I interview people of my choice. And usually, you can get hold of me through that. But the recordings of the English Baroque soloists and Monteverdi Choir and John Eliot Gardner, I'm on those, and you can get at that through Googling and things like that. But supporting, yes, I mean the Orchestra of the Age of Enlightenment, since we've been in lockdown, have somehow managed to keep alive with a sort of video program, and it's called OAE Player, and it would be great if anybody wanted to support that by subscribing to that, because I think the orchestra's been amazingly enterprising.
Yeah.
Yeah, lots of stuff. Great. We're good.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Well, thanks so much. It's really lovely, and you're very good at it.
Thanks so much for tuning in to Outside the Music Box. We hope you enjoyed our chat with Annette Isserlis.
If so, please subscribe, rate, and review this podcast and tell all your friends about it so that the algorithms do their magic and help more people find out about this podcast.
We'd also love to hear from you. If you have any questions or want to share music that you love, you can write to us at concerts.musicbox@gmail.com or on Facebook and Instagram at MusicBoxConcerts and Twitter at Outside Music Box. Write in with comments or questions that you have and we'll get back to you.
Big shout out to Joanna Neuschatz for her help with editing, and another reminder to donate via our PayPal, which is paypal.me/outsidemusicbox. It's super easy to donate, and these donations help keep the podcast running in lieu of advertising.
In the show notes, we've included links to 3 Spotify playlists, one specifically for the pieces in this episode, and the others for all the pieces we've talked about on this podcast so far. However, we really encourage you to purchase music in order to support the artists. The best way to support Annette is by going to the Orchestra of the Age of Enlightenment website and their OAE Player page, where you can watch lots of videos of her and the orchestra performing, and her awesome podcast, Tea with Nettie, which we've linked in the show notes as well.
See you next time outside the Music Box.